Hey everyone, good to see you again. Welcome back. So today I just wanted to do something for fun, and I wanted to look at the worst moments for each team in the Eastern Conference. So today I'm going to start with the Eastern Conference, and next up tomorrow I'm going to do the Western Conference. It's just there's a lot of teams and a lot of info, and I didn't want to make this video like 30 minutes long. We'll just get right into it. Now coming up first for the Carolina Hurricanes. Their worst moment in their history is losing in the Stanley Cup Final to Detroit in 2002. So they were a really young team with a young core, and they just beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in the Eastern Conference Final in Game 6 in overtime. And it sent them there, and they were the big underdog against the Detroit Red Wings. They weren't expected to do much, and that's pretty much what happened. They got swept in 4 straight games, and it definitely laid the foundation for the team going forward. But that is the worst moment in their history. Now the Columbus Blue Jackets, it's kind of up for debate. There's a lot of moments that were pretty down moments, but I think the worst one is definitely blowing a 2-0 series lead to the Washington Capitals the year where they still had Artemi Panarin and they still had Sergei Bobrovsky. Them blowing that 2-0 series led to the Washington Capitals eventually winning their first Stanley Cup, and thinking maybe what could have happened differently in history if they closed out that series and the Capitals didn't get their cup that year. Would you still be talking about the Capitals not having their cup? Now, the New Jersey Devils is pretty obvious to me. In the Stanley Cup Final, where a game they had to win, Rob Scuderi got hit from behind, and it led to a 5-minute major, and the LA Kings did not squander that opportunity. They scored power play goal after power play goal, and the LA Kings closed out and won the Stanley Cup, winning 6-2, their first Stanley Cup in 45 years of their history. Now, the New York Islanders, I think their worst thing that they've ever done is more of a managerial standpoint, and that was drafting Rick DiPietro and signing him to a 15-year, $67.5 million deal. And his career stats are 76 wins, 61 losses, 23 overtime losses, and 10 ties. Now, for a 15-year deal, which he's still getting paid for today, and he's working at a local New York radio station, I'd say that contract wasn't the best. But he hasn't appeared in more than 26 games in a season since the 2007-2008 season. Now on to the New York Rangers. I think it's pretty obvious and fresh in minds of hockey fans and Rangers fans is Alec Martinez scoring the overtime winner against the Rangers and Henrik Lundqvist, especially it being a home game for the Kings, just how loud that building was and how devastating of a loss that was, and how visibly devastated Henrik Lundqvist was, and saying that that was the closest he ever got. And I was maybe going to pick Adam Henrique scoring the overtime winner in the Eastern Conference Final to send the Devils to the final, but I'd say this one definitely takes the cake on that one of how close the Rangers got, maybe being the first time since '94 that they could have actually got a cup. Now for the Philadelphia Flyers, it's Patrick Kane scoring the overtime winner against the Flyers in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final in 2010, securing the first Stanley Cup since 1961 for the Chicago Blackhawks, and also just how strange the goal was, how no one knew it was in except Patrick Kane and possibly Michael Leighton. I think Leighton felt it go in, but just how confusing it was, and the possibility of it being called off and maybe just being a face-off to losing the Stanley Cup. It was, and seeing that angle of the goal going in and just knowing that it was done. I think that was definitely probably the most heartbreaking, worst moment for Flyers fans. Now to the Pittsburgh Penguins, I think their worst moment was being bankrupt in 2004 and maybe their light at the end of the tunnel being Alex Ovechkin and winning the draft lottery, and they couldn't even do that. But their consolation was Evgeny Malkin, and the year after they did end up getting Sidney Crosby after the lockout. And I think that's their worst moment because that was when there was talk of them being relocated and dissolved as a franchise because Pittsburgh has had history of not making money, and this isn't the first time. Even before Mario Lemieux came in, they were at risk of being relocated. Now to the Washington Capitals, their worst year, I couldn't pinpoint one. So, Washington Capitals was basically Crosby being the owner of the team throughout Ovi and Sid's career so far, except for 1 year where Washington prevailed and ended up getting through to them, getting the Eastern Conference Final, and eventually winning a Stanley Cup. Now, again, this was just a stretch of time. It was 15 years of disappointment, and it was Crosby who basically signed the papers and said, "I'm the owner of the Washington Capitals." Now, the Boston Bruins. The Boston Bruins is a 2-year span, but it is 2 specific years, and it's them losing the last 2 Stanley Cup finals they've appeared in. They lost recently to the St. Louis Blues in 7 games, which was very devastating, and losing against the Chicago Blackhawks, and in the style they did, blowing that lead, and Dave Bolin scoring that goal, throwing his gloves off, thinking that he won it in overtime or something. But definitely 2 devastating Stanley Cup losses. The Buffalo Sabres. How long have they been rebuilding? That's something that, is this a 10-year rebuild plan? Is it a 20-year one? How many drafts are we going to go through? How many people are we going to fire? When is this rebuild over? Because I remember it starting at the same time as the Leafs, maybe even a year before, and they're still in full-scale rebuild mode. But if I had to pick a moment that was the worst moment for them, it was obviously Brett Hull with his skate in the crease, scoring the overtime winner to win the Stanley Cup. And who knows what would have happened. Maybe if they didn't lose that game, they could have had the game 7 and maybe won it. Now, Detroit Red Wings. It's definitely going from 25 straight years of making the playoffs to the cellar of the Eastern Conference. And this has just been, I think, a system shock for Red Wings fans around the world. They went from being spoiled every single year and almost it was a tradition for them to be in the playoffs, and they had to go and rebuild, and they couldn't retool because they had so much big contracts, and they just had to go to a full-scale rebuild. So that's the worst one for the Red Wings. So for the Florida Panthers, it was Uwe Krupp ending the Florida Panthers Stanley Cup Final Cinderella run. We talked about this the other day, and it was an awesome run for the Florida Panthers, and just for, being severely overmatched by the Colorado Avalanche, putting up that fight, going to double overtime, and eventually losing on that play, and being completely dejected and exhausted. That's the worst moment in franchise history for the Panthers. Now, the Montreal Canadiens, they've had a long history, but I think the most recent worst one was definitely Marty St. Louis scoring the overtime winner in the Eastern Conference Final. Although it didn't secure the victory of winning the series, it put them up 3-1, and it just showed that the Rangers were definitely better than the Canadiens, and this snuffed out the final hope for Canada winning a Stanley Cup, and it extended the drought beyond that season. And ever since then, the Canadiens haven't been able to land on their feet. They haven't been able to get that far in the playoffs, and they're always expected to, especially with Carey Price in that. Now, the Ottawa Senators have 2 moments, and I think they're the highlights and lowlights of the Ottawa Senators franchise. It's losing in the Stanley Cup Final to the Anaheim Ducks, and Chris Phillips scoring on his own net in that series to secure the victory for the Anaheim Ducks, although it was a blowout game. That did not help scoring on your own net and getting caught up with Ray Emery. And the second thing for the Ottawa Senators is Chris Kunitz scoring the overtime winner in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Final, sending the Penguins to the Stanley Cup Final. And that was, again, a Cinderella run for them, but who knows? All it was one shot away from sending the Senators to their second Stanley Cup Final. Now the Tampa Bay Lightning, although they just won their Stanley Cup, they still are on this list because they have to be. They lost in 2015 to the Chicago Blackhawks, and although they were young and overmatched, and they were still expected to do something, and with Ben Bishop being injured, I don't think that was possible. They didn't have Vasilevsky as he is today. He was very young, and he came in relief, but I just think it wasn't their year. The Blackhawks were on the end of their dynasty. And the most recent thing for them is definitely getting swept by Columbus after winning 60-plus games, winning the President's Trophy. And although following it up with a cup this year is great, we do have to mention that. But congratulations to you guys on winning your cup. Now to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I couldn't just pick one moment, so I'm going to list them off for you. Just things that I remember that, and it doesn't take long because they do something every year to add to the list. I'm just going to list them off. So, starting with the Toronto Maple Leafs losing in the Eastern Conference Final in 2002 to Carolina. We're down 1-0, and we have to score or we go home. There's a scramble out front, and with 15 seconds left, Matt Sundin pots it home. This game's going to overtime. And overtime didn't work. We lost. And that sent Carolina to the Cup Final. That was the closest the Toronto Maple Leafs got to a Cup Final since we were there in '67. And when we'll talk about in a second with Gilmore, we almost got there too. And so I'm just going to quick fire this. Rask for Raycroft, 2020, 2019, 2018, 2017, and 2013 eliminations. 2004 to 2016 in general as a drought, except for 2013 if you count that. Randy Carlyle, Dave Nonis, Jonathan Bernier, Dion going for a hit and causing a 2-on-1 overtime goal, Grabowski being our number one center, and Gilmore's chin being cut like a side of beef at a butcher. Those are just a couple off the top of my head things that I can think of that the Leafs have gone through, put me through, and put fans through. So I don't think it would have done them justice just saying, oh, the 2013 elimination. No, you have to go all out and name everything. Alright, so this wraps up the worst moments that I can remember and kind of just worst moments in general for the Eastern Conference franchises. Just let me know what you think. Let me know if I missed one or if you don't agree with some of them. And I will be covering the Western Conference tomorrow. Thanks everyone for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.